This mindful musing is going to be a sort of open awareness style meditation on a crafting object. Now, a craft object, as opposed to an art object, to me, for my definitions, what I'm working with here, is that it serves a practical purpose as well as a decorative one. And sometimes the practical aspects can be most of what's decorative about it. Something that's very well designed can have its own aesthetics, where form follows function, as the saying goes. And other things can be more decorative, but that form and function needs to find a nice balance for it to go from something that's more of an art object into more of a craft object. And what I'm using right now as my object of this meditation is actually my journal. It's the last thing I crafted. And I do have ideas about making another one. So it's a good object because it's something I've made but also want to improve. But if you have a craft project that you're planning to make and you've never made something like this before, what is good to find is the nearest prototype you possibly can. And for that, there's all kinds of things that might not seem obvious, but can be very good objects to use in a meditation. Like this sort of pencil case is actually something I looked at to think about how I would want to make a journal cover. And you can find sometimes these sorts of examples where it's not exactly the tool you want or the object you're trying to make, but it has qualities of that. So if you want to pause the video and find something to use as your object, you can. You can also do this just purely with your imagination. And that might be a bit harder though. So having an actual physical object will help give some sort of stimulus for this that otherwise it can be hard to imagine, especially if you don't know what you don't know about making this particular sort of craft. So once you have your object, the first thing we're going to do is just become aware of this present moment with the breath. Taking some nice calming breaths. They don't have to be deep or loud or anything. You can just continue breathing and simply become aware of your breath as it is, trying to observe it without influencing it, if that's possible. And if it's not, just observe that. This will be sort of similar to the open awareness meditation that I've done before, where we're going to kind of expand outward. So from the breath, we'll just expand out to feel our body, feel our posture, maybe settle in a little bit more, get more comfortable. And then become aware of all the sensations in the body. Some of those will be tied to the breath. Some of those might be connecting with our meditation object right now. Now we can expand out a little further to encompass all of the sounds we're hearing in this moment. Any smells we might be smelling, any tastes that might be in your mouth, leftovers from breakfast or your whatever last meal you've had. Now we'll kind of turn our attention, well, instead of focusing in on the thing, try and keep sort of a nice open awareness, but let it wander to your object. And if anything else draws it, like a sound outside, something in the music, or something you see, that's fine. We're going to wander to and from. We don't want our attention to become a really direct spotlight here. We want to stay nice and open and just let this kind of float in and take up as much space as it wants to take up in this moment, or as much space as it can. And I'm using the sensation of it to ground me to it right now. I can already see a sort of functional aspect that's become somewhat problematic with this from a craft perspective, and that's fine. Seeking out things that aren't working with a past prototype, or if you have something that you've bought and it's not doing exactly what you want to, those are important things to note and become aware of. We'll let ourselves wander from feeling sensation, but also try and include the visual sensation as well. So as I'm feeling these objects, I'm recalling that they can sometimes present issues if I'm putting this into a bag or taking it out. They were decorative, so there is a sight versus sensation, or texture, form versus function, sort of duality there. And I have to admit that they are serving form more than function. So for the next book I want to make, I can make note of that there is a functional aspect that got lost in this form that could be improved on. And if there's aspects of it that are functional, like the very simple function of this book is that it opens and holds my books inside of it, I'm going to kind of explore how it's doing that. I can feel that these elastics are maybe not as strong as I would want. My solution here with this duct tape has actually caused some stickiness. And one of my magnets came off, so that's living somewhere else now. I forget where it ended up. It might have fallen off completely. And this clasp has gotten harder to actually use functionally as I've been using more and more craft paper, and it's exceeded the space that I originally plotted out for this to have to wrap around. So the more compressed this is, the better it fits. So that's just something to make note of, that I would have needed more room. And while this window is a fun concept and I've enjoyed it, it's also not as functional in that I'm not crazy about the way this texture feels. It's not very sturdy, and it does limit how much I can fold over this part of it. So as I'm opening my awareness to what I feel right now, I'm also opening to the past and the future. And again, this is a concept that can be a little confusing with a lot of meditation and concepts of mindfulness, where people kind of maybe confuse YOLO or Carpe Diem for mindfulness. And you can be mindful of the future. You are going to have to get up and work tomorrow probably, or if it's the weekend, get some stuff done around the house or meet people. And ignoring that isn't mindfulness. It's quite the opposite. So as I'm becoming mindful of this craft object, I am thinking about how I've used it in the past, at this desk, or when I try and take it with me somewhere, and think about how I would want that to be improved in the future. Because the whole idea of craftsmanship over time is that it's getting better, it's improving, and it's improving how this object functions in your life. So I have to think about the past and the future if I'm going to become mindful about how this object is acting now and how I could make a better one. So I've got some nice things that have arisen from that, some good notes for my next craft project. And honestly, if doing this seems a little bit weird, just keep in mind that this is a good way of bringing yourself into the object. Use your tactile senses, because that's a very strong grounding influence, especially keeping this in mind. When you meditate simply on the breath, there is a tactile sensation there. It's just not using your fingers. But you are using your proprioception, and you're feeling your body, which are tactile things, to feel the breath. You can physically put your hands there if you want, but these are ways of adding sensory input to your awareness of an object that you're using in meditation. So let your fingers do their thing. And if you want to continue, the sort of cues or things to remember in this are to use that tactile sensation and allow yourself to become aware of how this object exists in your life in the past, present, and future, and what might be improved or points of craftsmanship that you can add to it. Enjoy.
Now, to transition into my art part, I'm going to first bring some awareness to my posture and where the book is sitting here. I'm just going to take a few deep, calming breaths. I should say natural calming breaths. They don't have to be deep if they don't want to be deep. I'll become aware of the drawing that I'm going to be doing, this little snail with little bubbly designs on him. I'll give myself a little reminder of the time. So I've already selected a palette, as I usually do. And this one is trying to match this other little snail sticker I've got that I'd like to use in this when I get to my crafting part. So because that's part of my intention, I'm going to start by outlining the snail's shell. I'm certain I'm going to go offline here at some point, so I'm just going to mentally prepare myself for that now. One thing that's always good to be mindful in art is of the big picture. So as I'm going around any sort of curve like those ones I was doing at first, it's good to sort of look at where you want to end up as well as where you are. So instead of just looking, let's say here on the line, if that's where my pen is, looking there and keeping both points with awareness. This can really help with designs with a lot of little details that can try to suck you in. And every now and again, it can help to expand that awareness out to the whole piece here. And maybe if you're using something like me, to whether there's something you want to keep in mind about later in the design. So I did want to add some of this gray to this and trying to choose where I think they'll look the best, because I don't want it all to be gray. I still want there to be a lot of red in this, but I might just do a couple of these areas. Ooh. Maybe alternate some of these shells or spirals. There's not much to do there, so maybe I'll just add my own little dots. And come back along here. Do some of these weird little eye shapes. They never do quite end up following the original design perfectly, but that's okay. Part of this mindful art practice is not being judgmental about that sort of thing. And enjoying seeing where things end up. Now I'll do this big outline in brown. Since there's a lot of little detail in here, I'm certainly not going to get to all of it within the 10 minutes before I want to wander over to my writing prompt. But that's part of this practice, is deciding what I can get done in 10 minutes and being happy with that. Okay, I kind of like how that ended up. And I did have some green and pink, although the sky might end up being all green. Unless I just leave a couple leaves to be flowers, or since I like adding dots to things, I might do that. Simple designs like this can make for good warm-ups, but since this is a simple practice, you don't really need to warm up, unless you're planning on making this the whole focus and really getting into detail, trying to make this a more expansive art practice. Then it can help to warm up the fingers and markers and pens or whatever a little bit with some amount of simpler sort of lines and dots. Warm-ups are really just simpler forms of the thing you're about to practice. The reason I choose to outline things first is because for whatever I don't get time to do right now in this 10 minutes, the outline will give me a color cue that I can go back and fill in these areas with some green later if I choose to. So there's these little unleafed stems on here, and I'm going to use those as places to put my dots. I kind of like the idea of them being a little separate, like they're flying off. But if you wanted to make connected dots, that's available as well. I might have missed some stems on this side because they were a little light. And you know, I wouldn't have noticed that if I hadn't looked back at this side of the design. So that's a good example of how being mindful of the entire piece can be very helpful for keeping everything sort of in view and seeing how certain parts might affect other parts. I'm out of sand, so I'm just gonna let myself finish what I'm doing right here for a couple seconds before I wander over to my art part, and I'm happy with that for now, so I think I'll tuck some of these away. And I'm just going to read the question over as I do this. So what would you encapsulate in a small terrarium to keep a little spring on your desk all year long? I'd like to use the green and pink for this. And this is another spot where I did a little rearranging because this is actually the prompt for another page. And I cannot believe that didn't occur to me when I was putting this together that, oh, I should be resetting this timer. But I can't believe that didn't occur to me when I was making this journal that this prompt would obviously go really well with the snail. Don't know what I was thinking. But there are a lot of moving parts when you're putting stuff together like this, so I'll forgive myself for that little flub. Now I'm going about tracing over this in a very haphazard way, but that's because I wanted spring, the word spring, to be in green. No other reason. And terrariums are sort of things that I think of as mostly having plants in them. So moss is a good thing to have in there, but also probably some small, easy plants. So I'll let myself come back to that, but rocks would be a good thing. Some sort of water feature would be neat. And then, as for creatures to go inside of it, my niece and nephews were keeping I didn't finish that. We're keeping a snail in a terrarium. So that's also why I wanted to put this together, is it became ridiculously obvious after seeing the snail in the terrarium that these belong together. So maybe that's why I didn't think of it before. And I don't know if I'd want to keep a snail myself. It would be really cool to have something like a salamander or axolotl, however you say that word. Those little amphibians would be super neat. I have other friends that have frogs in a very big terrarium. And I've had friends who keep snakes, and that sort of thing. And spiders as well. All very terrarium-able animals. But for myself, I'm taking a bit of a break for pets and trying to focus on my garden. So I think if I put any features in there, I grabbed this little bird that a friend and me painted two sort of things like this together. So I'm thinking more decorative little things like birds, butterflies would be fun. Flowers would be neat if you could get anything to flower in a terrarium. I haven't reached that level of expertise, but that would be really neat to have. And then on the other side of this, if I'm thinking of things that grew for me this year, it would be fun to put as decorative objects some books and maybe a tiny desk like the one I'm using for this practice. Could be a really fun thing to have as little objects inside the terrarium. So, can't quite think of anything else at the moment, but as I have found in past videos, sometimes if I wander back over to some coloring, that allows my mind to fall on something else that I could stick in here. Oh, I do have kind of a weird obsession with skulls and bones. I don't know if it's that weird. As an artist, they're very important objects to look at if you want to understand how to draw something. So, it's not a morbid fascination. It's more of a structural, how does this work sort of interest. And wonder if there's anything else like that I could use as a sort of decorative element. I mean, my meditation practice has been growing this spring and changing a bit, so I could have a little Buddha in there as another decorative element that's often something I'll see in those sand gardens or along with plants like bonsai trees. This gold didn't end up being as gold as I was hoping for, so I think I might do some spots with it. And then I might blend in some of that other yellow. But this is kind of actually a dangerous activity because it has the potential to draw me in much further than I want to go, since I am trying to keep some awareness towards allowing other terrarium objects to come up. I suppose if I were to think about what I would put it in, I would use a fish bowl. I've been using these for a bunch of my plants lately because they're easy to find in thrift stores. They tend to crop up since a lot of kids, let's face it, the goldfish is a very unfortunate animal in how it's often kept, and those little fish bowls aren't nearly enough space to have a healthy animal in there. So I've been using them for plants, because plants get along in there just fine. Trying to think now of some things that bloom in the spring that could fit in a terrarium. So far I've been doing mostly just cacti have been my most successful terrarium objects. I've tried a couple mosses, and getting the moisture balance is quite hard for that. So I'm not sure exactly how I'd want to put in that for if I want to keep anything living in there, like moss and flowers. That would be a little bit harder. But, maybe I'm being a little bit too realistic with this exercise. Maybe I should just start thinking of what symbolizes spring for me. And yeah, new shoots. Squill. It's a slightly invasive species of flower, but it's one of the first things you'll see crop up. Some of the first things that I've seen in my garden have been dandelions. So I think of them as a spring flower. And I've been hearing birds again, so that's why I was thinking of those. And that's added a little bit of imagination to this. And once again, I think I'm just running out of sand now. So I'll move on to my crafting part after I get a couple more of these leaves. There we go. I like how that little snail turned out. So for the crafting, I'll just start playing with arrangement here. I often like to keep it on one page for the sake of when I put my journal entry in later, but part of the reason why I tend to encapsulate my prompts in tapes is to keep it separate from that. And speaking of which, I'll set my little reminder here. So maybe I'll start by sectioning this off. Just make sure, yeah, that'll fit just fine. One thing I've been practicing lately is trying to use stronger tapes with weaker tapes in the right sort of order. So I've been using these more decorative tapes as the first tapes that go down, and they'll overlap some stronger tapes over top of them. And I don't know where I've left my scissors and everything. They must have wandered out of my usual craft box to somewhere. That's okay. I'll just explore using some other things. I can always just accept some rough edges for today's practice. Good thing this one's slightly opaque, or slightly transparent, because it's going to be covering up some of my writing prompt. But fortunately, I can still read it. So, I guess if I'm missing my little pocket, these will actually have to get taped down instead of glued down first, which is fine. That'll just require a little extra planning on my part. And we'll have more overlapping tape. Nothing wrong with that. Kind of like the way that's looking with my ripped up edges. And one thing I'm trying to do, just to keep things sort of add some symmetry, since there's a cut edge and going to be a rough edge, is putting those on the same side. You can also alternate though. Symmetry certainly isn't the only game in town. But I never would have explored this had I not forgotten to put my little case back. So that's a welcome happy accident. A good reminder that straight edges aren't always what has to be done with art. I really like that sort of cross rip that ended up happening there. Now I'm just adding more rips wherever I can. But it's funny that I forget that this is available to me. There. I really like that sort of haphazard, ripped up look that I ended up with accidentally from this. Now, I wanted these stickers to be about there. I want my little guy here. And I'm kind of charmed by the idea of them looking up to the moon and having some attendant butterflies going with them. So, yeah, I like that arrangement. Maybe I'll put this guy upside down just for fun. Now, I want that in sort of his sight line, so about there. Yeah. I'm always a little bit charmed by the idea of having the little stickers, if they're, you know, if I can find a way to make them sort of animate, doing that. Here we are. Well, I'm quite happy with the way that turned out. And I think I'm out of sound again, so I hope you enjoyed this journal session with me. I hope you join me again. I'm not sure why I didn't think of this before, but later on I just tried pressing some of these little Hoya flowers into my journal pages and taping them down to make a little terrarium and tape right in here. Just an idea.